Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm super excited to share with all of you my first impressions of the Charlotte Tilbury Smokey Eyes Are Forever Holiday Palette. So that's this beautiful 12-pan eyeshadow palette with 4 trios that create separate looks. I'm a huge fan of Charlotte Tilbury products, but her eyeshadows have always been a bit hit or miss for me, so I'm really excited to try out this large palette, which is my first of her large holiday style palettes. Even though this video focuses on this palette though, I'll also be showcasing my first impressions of some other new products that I picked up this week. And that includes her Super Nudes lipstick in the shade Runway Royalty, this incredibly gorgeous and luxurious bronzer from Victoria Beckham, my first blush from Mercier in the shade Fresco, and a couple eyeliners from the brand 1999. So there's a ton of makeup to go over in today's video, so without further ado, let's get into these products. So before we get into swatches of the eyeshadow palette, my lips are feeling a little dry at the moment, so I'm gonna go in with this lipstick. So here is the Fresh Untouched Bullet, and the shade is described as a nude, soft, rosy peach lipstick with a fresh, dewy satin finish lip look. And here we have the shade on my lips. So it's a little bit light on me. It's definitely giving me some of that concealer lip look. So I think normally I would pair this with a lip liner, but since today our focus is on the smoky eyes, hopefully this pairs well. I do really love this formulation from Charlotte though. Her Kissing formula is one of my all-time favorite formulas for lipsticks. So now with the lips nicely hydrated, let's go into this beauty. So this is what the packaging looks like. So it's in a pretty plain black hard plastic packaging with the Charlotte Tilbury logo in rose gold. And then on the back, as is typical for Charlotte palettes, she has instructions on how you can use them. And here we have the gorgeous palette, and you can see here that we have 4 different color stories. And in theory, the way she recommends you use her eyeshadows is that the first shade is a prime shade, the second is enhance, and the third is smoke. But you can obviously play around with them however you'd like. So I will say this compact is a little bit lighter than it looks, and I have seen some comments from folks who bought previous year's palettes that this one is lighter than previous years. So that's just something I wanted to note because this packaging is definitely a lot simpler than in previous years. So that's fine by me. I do like the sleek black packaging this has, but it maybe has a slightly less luxurious holiday feeling in comparison to past years. So now let's get into the swatches. So here are the first 3 shades called Love Eyes, starting with a beige matte shade, and then a shimmery pink shade. Ooh, that's really pretty. Has a slight rose gold element to it. Actually looks very similar to Runway Royalty. And then there's a very glittery lid topper textured shade that reminds me a little bit of the texture of her pop shades. This one is a little bit flaky, so it's really beautiful once you lay it down flat, but you might have some fallout with the shade. Next, we have the 3 shades in Power Eyes, and this is definitely the trio I'm most excited about in this palette. So first you have an army green brownish shade, and I will say these mattes do take a couple layers to look really opaque. Next you have this really gorgeous green shade that has a little hint of olive green in it, but also a slight golden shimmer. And then we have a deeper green shade, and this is a little bit of a creamier, more satin formula with a deeper base pigment to it. And in case you guys can't tell, I'm just making up these shade descriptions because I wasn't able to find official ones on the web. Next we have Happy Eyes, which I think is a beautiful warm color story for the fall. So first there's this golden bronzy shimmery shade that is also in this sort of wet, almost pop shade texture. Next we have this orangey red shimmer, which is in her smoother shimmer formula. And then we have this warm tawny matte shade. And here we have the last trio, which is called Confident Eyes, and this is where all the smoke comes in. So first we have this pinky berry shimmer, which again is in that formula that feels almost like a glitter topper instead of a metallic shade. Next we have this deep brown matte shade, which I think will be great for just deepening up any look. And then finally, it would not be a smoky eye palette without a black. So let me just deepen that up a little bit. So here we have the whole palette swatched. It's a really beautiful color story and really gorgeous for the fall time. Of course, if you collect a lot of Charlotte Tilbury palettes, you likely already have all of these shades. Charlotte does kind of stick within a pretty narrow range of color stories that she releases eyeshadow in. But for me personally, I don't have many shades like this from Charlotte in particular. I have probably most of these shades from Pat McGrath, maybe several dupes for each of these shades, and also probably some dupes from Natasha Denona. But at least in terms of Charlotte Tilbury, I don't have a lot of these shades yet, so I'm really excited to try out her formula in these color stories. So in most videos I've seen reviewing this palette or similar palettes that Charlotte has come out with, people will basically do one look per trio. But I think with this color story in particular, this trio and this trio aren't necessarily the best for building a whole look around. So instead, I'm just gonna do one look on each eye, and one look is gonna be focused more on these two trios, and then the other look will focus on this one and that one. So I'll definitely cover all of the shades in today's look. So starting out, I'm actually gonna use this little brush I got from Charlotte Tilbury with the palette. And I'm gonna dip into this white shade. Actually, that picked up quite a bit. And I'm just gonna put this on the outer portion of my lids, just to set my primer a little bit and make it easier for any other shadows to blend out. As you can see, this is not really adding any pigmentation to my lids. This is really just to make sure everything else blends in really seamlessly. I think this is the first time Charlotte has included a color like this in one of her palettes. And I do kind of wish it was a different shade, something that actually stood out on the skin. But it's true, having a shade like this is handy for ensuring better blendability. So next up with that same brush, I'm gonna go into the first shade in Power Eyes. And I'm gonna use this all over the crease area of my left eye. And I've also never used Charlotte brushes before, so this is kind of a new experience as well. I'll need to actually wash this brush to see how well it performs when it's fluffed out. So far, not super impressed with the brush, but this color is blending out super easily. It's really nice and softly buildable. I think this will be a great transition shade for pretty much any look that you do with this palette if you are of a similar skin tone to myself. So I do want to fix that up a little bit with my Wayne Goss number 16. So I'm just going to go in with that and also use this to more thoroughly blend everything. And then with that same brush, I'm going to go into the matte shade in Happy Eyes. Ooh, okay, that definitely has more of a pigment punch. I'm actually cleaning off my brush a bit and now going in to blend this out. And I do have primer on my lids today. Okay, I do think that the reddish hue blended away a little bit, so I'm gonna add some more. Alrighty, I am getting a little bit of patchiness over here on my eye. I don't know if you guys can see that. It could just be because of that brush though, so I'm not gonna fault the shadow quite yet. I will say though that combining these two mattes does lead to more of a brownish hue, which makes sense because it's green and red, but just something to make note of if you are trying to combine shades across this palette. You might want to keep the greens and reds a little bit more separate. Alrighty, so now with my builder brush, I'm gonna go into this deepest shade, sweep this on the outer third of my eyes. We're gonna have a lot of shimmers on this eye today. That applied really beautifully. Wow, okay. That's really nice. And then with the other side of that brush, I'm going into the lighter green shade. And I'm just gonna put that more on the center of the lid, overlapping a little bit with the deeper shade. Ooh, and again, the shimmers are applying so easily, even with a brush. I feel like usually to get this level of shine, I would go in with a finger, but that's really pretty just on one application. Now switching brushes, I'm gonna go into this Lid Toppery shade from Happy Eyes. And I'm gonna, whoa, that had quite a bit of fallout. Okay, so let me tap off my brush and try again. Wow, okay, this is very, I feel like I definitely need to go in with a finger with this shade just to make sure the flakes don't fly everywhere. It's a really beautiful shade, definitely very high shine. I'm kind of reconsidering my placement of that shade, but really gorgeous. Okay, with the other side of that brush, I'm gonna go into this middle shade, which should be a little bit smoother, and I'm just gonna put this on the inner third of the eyes because I kind of want this gradient effect going from red to green. And now I'm just gonna carefully blend everything together. I will say whenever I go over the slightly golden lid toppery shade, I do get fallout everywhere. I think in the future when I use this palette, I'm gonna go in with this shade on a finger and just tap it in and not run my brush over it at all. Alrighty, so here we have the lid of the first eye done, and I'm overall digging the autumn vibes, but I do think if I did this look again, I'd probably apply the colors in a little bit of a different order, just given the textures, but overall it's still a pretty look. So before we go into the lower lash line on this side, I'm gonna go ahead and just do the lid on this other side so we can see all the shades. So on this side, I'm gonna go directly into this deep brown shade and see how easy it is to blend this guy out. Because this is a pretty deep shade. I would normally like to first have a lighter transition shade, but I'm using my reference number 16, and I'm just gonna see how this goes by itself. Alrighty, so far so good. It's definitely not as easy to blend out as, say, my Sydney Grace eyeshadows, but it's still doing a pretty decent job. Alrighty, so here we have the dark brown shade all by itself. There's a little bit of patchiness right here, like a little bit of a bald spot it's not covering up for some reason, but that's okay. We'll return to that later on. So going now into my Wayne Goss number 19 brush, I want to see how this black shade performs. So I'm just going to concentrate this on the outer corner of my eyes and see how blendable it is. It's definitely got a decent amount of pigment to it. So if you're using this as a liner, I think this will be really good. All right, so after a decent amount of blending, this is what we have, and I think it overall looks pretty good. The black was actually surprisingly easier to work with for me than the brown. So I would say that in the future, I would probably go in with the matte from the green trio and then put that all over as a transition shade and then deepen it up with the brown and then go in with the black rather than starting out with the dark brown. So now we have 3 shimmers to play around with. So first with my GSN 9 brush, I'm gonna go into this shade from the first trio and just plop this in the inner third. This is one of the more creamy metallic formulations, so this is applying really smoothly with just a brush. It's a little bit of a light shade. I feel like it's a bit translucent, so I'm gonna continue building it up just to see if I can get opacity with this. Yeah, maybe not quite. Let me go in with a finger and see if that helps. Oh yeah, okay. Finger application is definitely the way to go if you want this shade to be fully opaque. So now going in with a finger, I'm gonna use this shade from Confident Eyes and put this on the center of the lid, and this one is very flaky. Wow, I am getting quite a bit of fallout. So be careful with this shade. Yeah, not quite giving me the opacity I was looking for. This texture definitely is a little bit more like a lid topper rather than a all over the lid shade. Okay, let me try to blend things out in that corner. I will say these 2 shades look very similar when next to each other. I honestly can't tell that I applied 2 different shades to my lids. Here they are swatched with Love Eyes on the bottom and Confident Eyes on the top. So I think you can definitely see a bit more of a shade difference here, but on the lids, at least if you have my skin tone, they might look really similar. Alrighty, so with the last shade of the palette, let me first try using this one as a lid topper and see if it adds any more shine here. Okay, that did add a little bit more glow because it has more of kind of a golden tone to it. I will definitely say I like this look a lot better than this look. This one is looking a little haphazard at the moment. Let me try just blending things out a little bit more to see how things go. Every time I blend these shadows though, I am just finding that I'm getting fallout all over the place. So that's kind of annoying because this is a lot of glitter toppers for this many shades, especially if you're trying to use these actually in the trios, because like this is the only shimmer shade for this trio. So I would not suggest using this trio just by itself. Alrighty, so ignoring how this look is looking at the moment, let's just go in and finish with the lower lash line. So first off, with my soft definer brush from Sonia G, I'm gonna go into this shade in Power Eyes and just sweep this all over the lower lash line on this side. And then I'm also gonna take that red shade from Love Eyes and put it on the outer portion, just so we can match the top. And then with my smudger one, I'm gonna take some of this green shade and sweep this all over the center of the lower lash line. And cleaning that off, I'm going into this shade and putting that on the inner third. And then I'm also actually gonna take some of that deeper green shade and just sweep that on the very outer corner. And then for inner corner highlight, I'm gonna try this really flaky shade because it's the obvious one for inner corner highlight. And just try to dip that. Oh wow, that is very intense. Okay, so definitely works as an inner corner highlight, but it's really, really bright. So I'm gonna go ahead and just also put some of that on this side. Be a little careful with this. I would recommend using a smaller brush to apply this if you want to use it as inner corner highlight. And then cleaning off my soft definer, I'm going into the dark brown shade now. And I'm gonna put this all over the lower lash line on the other eye. And then dipping just the tip of my brush into the black shade, I'm gonna sweep this on the outer portion. And then now I'm gonna go into this shade with my smudger brush and hopefully I don't get fallout everywhere. Alrighty, so that was actually okay. Just to add a little bit more shine, I'm gonna go into this shade lightly and then also put this in the inner third. Alrighty, so here are the two eyeshadows done. So now I'm gonna go off and put on this 1999 eyeliner and be back with the final eyeshadow look. Alrighty, so here are the finished eyeshadow looks. So on this side, we have an autumn inspired look with the leaves turning from green to gold and red. And I think this look overall turned out pretty well. I would definitely recommend not mixing together the green and red mattes because the brownish tone they become is not necessarily the most flattering, but overall, I think it still works as a look. This look, on the other hand, is kind of like a smoky, glittery mess. So I would definitely say be very careful when you're layering these shimmery shades. This palette is pretty unique as far as Charlotte Tilbury's 12 pans in terms of having 3 shades, this one, and this one, that are in this really flaky glitter topper formula. So those 3 shades aren't gonna have a ton of base pigment in them, and they really need to be applied with a finger. And if you blend any shadows on top of them, they're likely just gonna flake off. So before I get into my overall thoughts and review of this palette, let's just finish off the rest of my face with some bronzer and blush. So first off, I'm gonna do an entirely separate video focusing on Victoria Beckham Beauty, but I just got this beauty in the mail today and just had to try it on. So can we just admire for a moment how gorgeous this packaging is? This is such a weighty compact, definitely the heaviest, most luxurious bronzer I've ever held. And then to open this, you just click this button and it pops open. And you have a bronzer on the right and a contour on the left. So going in with my Wayne Goss number 12, I'm gonna first just tap into the contour shade and use this to just add a little bit of depth. And this, by the way, is in the shade 3. So this should be for medium to tan skin tones. There we go. That's a really pretty color. I feel like this is a shade I would also just use as bronzer by itself. I mean, it's definitely more of a contour than a bronze, but on days when you're really not looking to add more warmth to your skin, I feel like this would be perfect. And now flipping over my brush, I'm gonna go into the bronzer side and just add some warmth. And I feel like this shade is definitely really good for my skin. This bronzer is overall pretty subtle on my skin tone, so something that I don't have to worry about building up too much. And then I'll use some of the contour on my jawline. Alrighty, so here is the bronzer on, and I'll be doing a separate video with this bronzer and the Posh lipstick, and I'll provide a ton of comparison swatches with the rest of my bronzer collection. So if you're interested in that, definitely let me know in the comments down below, and also subscribe so you can be notified when that video comes out. And now for the blush, let's go into Fresco from Laura Mercier. And I've heard such amazing things about Laura Mercier blushes. And for those of you who saw my recent blush roundup, I of course did not have this blush when I filmed that video, but I will include this in future rankings. So this blush does have a slight shimmer to it, but as it's applying to the skin, I feel like you don't really see any of the shimmery particles. They're kind of blending away. This is a nice, really natural blush on my skin tone. It doesn't really add a ton of pigment, but I would say it adds a little bit of blurring and just a tiny hint of bronziness and also some rosy undertones. So now for my overall thoughts about this palette. So I would say that overall I really like the color story, and for the most part I think the quality of the shadows is really great. I did have a little bit of trouble using this Confident Eyes dark brown shade as a transition shade, but that's okay. I think that's to be expected from dark brown shadows. If this were Sydney Grace formulation, I think it would have been fine, but indie brands are in a separate league when it comes to blendability. In terms of the shimmers, they all swatched so incredibly beautifully. I had extraordinarily high hopes for them after doing these swatches. I will say though, after putting them on the lids, I do find this palette to be a little bit finicky to work with, just because if you get a 12-pan palette like this, I imagine for most folks, you're not actually gonna only stick to the trios that she's laid out here. And in fact, even if you wanted to do that, it's a little bit tricky because this trio and this trio really aren't complete looks in and of themselves. So in theory, you should be able to really jump around in the palette and mix and match any shades as you please. But because you have these glitter toppery formulas interspersed, it's a little bit tricky to use this palette. This shade in particular I found was just very crumbly, and even with a finger was hard to apply without a bunch of fallout. This one was a little bit easier, fortunately, perhaps because I just put it on a smaller area. And then this one I would definitely recommend using with a small brush rather than spreading it all over, because it is a very glittery shade. I think in the future when I use these eyeshadows, I probably will just try to keep the look really simple. So I'll definitely only use one of the glitter topper shades in any given look. I think these two shades and this shade on the lid come across a little bit redundant. As you can see with this eye look over here, everything just kind of blends together when you try to use these shadows. So I wouldn't recommend incorporating more than one of these three shades in a given look, unless you're, for example, just using this in your inner corner. Also, the fact that these two mattes don't really work well together from a color theory perspective is a little unfortunate, because at least for me personally, the way I like doing my matte shadows is I like starting with a light transition and then doing a more mid-tone shade and then going in with the deepest shade. And in this palette, you basically have a light transition here, and then a nice mid-tone shade, and then two really deep shades here. And so you don't really have the option to apply mattes the way I would like, unless you use both of these and then combine it with one of these. And as we found out today, that's not necessarily the best way to go unless you want these two to just become kind of a generic brown color. So overall, based on my first impression, I can't say that this is my favorite Charlotte Tilbury palette, and it's definitely not one of my favorite palettes of the recent palettes that I've tried out. That said, I will keep playing around with this, and it could just be that I was too ambitious in how I applied the shadows today. I probably should have just kept things a lot simpler. If you guys have picked up this palette, I'd love to hear in the comments down below what you guys have thought about this. I feel bad being so down about this palette, but at least upon initial impressions. If you're someone like me who likes building looks with a lot of different shades, you might not find this to be the easiest to work with. If you're someone instead that likes just using 2 or 3 shadows in a given look, I think you can make this work for you. But if you're someone who really doesn't like fallout, I would definitely not recommend this palette for you. As someone who bought this with my own money, I would say that this is not necessarily worth $75 to me. I'll keep playing around with this palette, and I might film a follow-up video doing some more looks. Let me know if you guys would be interested in that. Maybe if I just keep my looks simple, it will go a lot more smoothly. But I hope this is helpful for any of you who have been considering this palette. And like I said, I think it can work for some folks, but it's definitely not blowing me away, and it's not something I would necessarily recommend. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!